Australia's top spy agency has warned foreign espionage will replace terrorism as the greatest threat to national security by 2025. ASIO has revealed spies are targeting Australia's mining and agriculture sectors to get information on how the nation is diversifying trade away from China. Joining me live is Daniel Lewkovitz, CEO of Calamity Monitoring. Daniel, good morning.
Good morning, Janie.
Daniel, this week it's been revealed a significant number of foreign spies and their proxies have been removed from Australia or rendered inoperative. That's an alarming revelation.
Well, it's more than that, Janie. I mean, you know it's a big deal when intelligence agencies start putting things into the media. This is not a new threat. This is not a new problem. This has been around for a very long time. And I suppose to some extent, foreign intelligence agencies, including our own, working in the interests of a nation against ours is nothing new. But the fact that this is so mainstream is perhaps a good indicator to the layperson how prolific this issue has actually become now that it's going to become part of the national discourse in much the same way, I suppose, that terrorism did after 2001 on 9/11, even though at that time that also wasn't a completely new threat. It was just the first time the ordinary person in the street woke up to it.
So what action then, Daniel, can Australian agencies take to try to push against these foreign players?
Well, what's happened is a change in focus, not from predominantly kinetic warfare, so, bombs, guns, missiles, terrorism, beheading and so forth, to additional threats that can target the sovereignty of our nation, our democracy, our economy and so forth. And, it's not easy for the average person to necessarily have a big role to play in anti-terrorism or counter-terrorism, but in terms of protecting the national interest from an information point of view, counter-espionage point of view, that's certainly something that's relevant, for example, to businesses who have the ability to protect our information assets, that's their computer networks, take steps to prevent cyber warfare and so forth, as well as for the ordinary population to just be aware of the threats that this nation faces. For example, Chinese counterfeit technology was found in Cisco routers many years ago. So even though organisations all the way up to defence around the world might have only bought from what they thought were trusted suppliers, Cisco, an American company, was a good example. Evaluation of these products found counterfeit chips inside, so actual hardware devices inside that allowed information to be stolen. And so this was going into secure environments. Now, to some extent, that's not necessarily something that, an ordinary business might be able to concern itself with. But when we look at some of the things that have happened recently, network attacks, information theft and so forth, it's very, very important that companies take care of this, not only because it's in the national interest, which is obviously something we should all care very deeply about, but because it's actually relevant to specific businesses. We've seen in the saber rattling that's going on right now between this country and China that it's very easy for businesses to suffer, partly because whilst on the one stage, democracies have traditionally been opposed to communism and so forth, we're in an interesting state at the moment where we're also massive trading partners with some of these entities as well. So there's a tense relationship there, but one that needs to be managed very, very carefully.
And you spoke a lot about the businesses, but also youth radicalisation, Daniel, has been highly spoken about. What advice would you give to people and what signs to look out for?
Well, so this is coming back to what I was saying earlier, that whilst, the focus may increase in certain areas that perhaps were less of a threat previously, that doesn't mean that existing threats are no longer around. I mean, the threat of violent extremism, terrorism and so forth is certainly one that continues to hurt nations worldwide. At the moment, we're on the way to a terrible anniversary, which will be something like 40,000 deadly Islamist attacks just since 9/11. And so these are staggering numbers. And, some would say, well, this is just part of modern life we live in. But, when I look around at the moment and I see that, economies and communities around the world right now are suffering, these are additional headaches that we absolutely don't need. And it's something that we need to focus on. So really, to use a phrase that some people haven't heard, and perhaps it was mocked a bit when it was first uttered by our then Prime Minister, but be alert, not alarmed. It's very important that Australians, watch out for things. If you see something strange, inquiries being made of your organisation or people acting in a peculiar manner, it's important to get advice and report that, because look, hopefully it's nothing, but it may be something. I'll give you a good example. At the moment, there is a Russian pirate website that offers academic papers. Now, traditionally, these are things that are very costly, and students and academics have to subscribe. So this pirate website, might seem tempting for them, but researchers have determined that that site is actually harvesting passwords and credentials of academics and people who are at the university. So in other words, this is basically a honeypot that attracts those sort of people in. And so, of course, once they've got that, they can then gain a foothold into our research institutions and gain access to information that's nationally sensitive. And so these are things that our spy agencies, our intelligence agencies, and our domestic law enforcement are always on the lookout. One of the things that I think people need to realise is that it's not necessarily countries at war with us trying to impose direct harm on us. One of the other things that foreign intelligence services can do is sow unrest and sow discord within a community. So, obviously a few years ago, everybody was saying that it was Russian bots and so forth that were trying to get Donald Trump elected. And of course, I think what people didn't realise is that it actually didn't matter really who got elected president of the United States, whether it was Hillary Clinton, whether it was Donald Trump. What mattered was seeing ordinary Americans turning on each other in the street. And that's something that we see to these days. Once upon a time, foreign intelligence had to actually insert people into nations, have them live in the community. It was a tremendously costly exercise, but now it's something that can be done from their own countries via the internet. So I think it's also important for people to realise that when you're fighting strangers on the internet, when you're essentially calling for uprisings in your own community, you're actually hurting this nation. It's a lot bigger than just fighting someone on the internet. This is pretty much exactly what the enemies of this nation would like you to be doing. And I'm concerned that a lot of people seem to fall for it. They're being radicalised online. There are supposedly grassroots movements that are in fact being sponsored and promoted by overseas intelligence. And, during the Cold War era and even prior to that, the Soviets would refer to useful idiots in the West who were essentially people that would help them without even realising that they were doing so. And so this is something for people to think about when they're getting in fights on the internet.
How quickly can someone get radicalised?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, for example, Islamic extremism, where, a person could go from the, ordinary Muslim schoolboy to someone who would actually kill. Research came out of Israel a few years ago from debriefing some failed terrorist attacks, where it turned out that that could be as little as 9 to 12 weeks. So it's an astonishingly short period of time, and it's important to note that these are people who have no prior criminal history. These are people who are not in any sort of intelligence radar, and our intelligence agencies do phenomenal work. Our policing agencies do phenomenal work, but as it's always been said, they have to get it right every single time. Someone who wants to cause harm only has to get it right once. And so, the time frame is shifting lower and lower. The proliferation of online material has created a huge exposure to this, from the comfort of someone's home. But having said that, I think it's important to recognise that incitement to radicalism doesn't necessarily just happen online. It's unusual that someone is just sitting at home watching cat videos on YouTube, and then all of a sudden they see something, and next thing they're running around trying to perpetrate acts of violence. These are sentiments that come from a variety of directions. They come from what's online. They come from what's spoken about in the home around the dinner table. They come from what's taught in schools. They come from what's discussed at prayers and so forth. So, it's really important to look at this. And it's one of the challenges that I suppose our intelligence agencies have, because there really is a two-way relationship between communities, from where some of this violence emanates, to the extent that on the one hand, our defence agencies, our law enforcement agencies, our intelligence agencies want to sort of squash this incitement and squash this threat. But at the same time, because they simply can't have eyes and ears everywhere, and personally, I don't want the government to have eyes and ears everywhere. They also rely on information being fed to them by these communities. So, it's important on the one hand to stop a problem without also at the same time getting, the friendlies offside as well. And so, there is a balancing act